Appeals Court recently ruled that you can send the National Guard in Portland, Oregon. Do you feel unfettered to send the National Guard into whatever city you want now?
Well, I guess so. That was the decision. I can send the National Guard if I see problems. I looked at Portland over the weekend. The place is burning down, just burning down. We weren't there. We didn't spend much time there because we were waiting for that decision. But the court, maybe that influenced the court. But you look at a place like Portland, it's ridiculous when they say that there's no problem. The place was on fire over the weekend. But we won the case in Court of Appeals. I think it was the Ninth Circuit, so that's pretty good. And a very strong opinion that we have the right to use the National Guard.
This is Democracy Watch. Mark, that was Donald Trump speaking to a reporter in the Oval Office who had asked if he feels unfettered to be able to send in the National Guard, to which Donald Trump replied, I guess so. I looked at Portland over the weekend. The place is burning down. It was on fire. And so clearly, based on the decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals staying the lower court's ruling, that's Judge Immergut, a judge who Trump himself appointed, based on this ruling, he now feels unfettered to be able to deploy the National Guard, not just back into Portland, but across the country. So first and foremost, can you speak on the legality of this line of thinking where now he does feel unfettered to be able to send in the National Guard wherever he wants?
Yeah, and he does based on clear lies, right? I mean, that's the other right. Part of this clip, right? Is that what he is saying is, I believe that Portland is burning when it is in fact not burning. And that is actually a verifiable fact, right? It's not a question of opinion. The only thing going on in Portland are people riding bicycles and a bunch of people dressed up in sort of T-Rex costumes. And so what I worry that the Ninth Circuit has done here, at least for the time being, is that they have blessed that Donald Trump can live in a fantasy world and then deploy the military based on just a pack of lies. I mean, just like a verifiable lies. And that is why this opinion is so dangerous. And it's the reason why, and I know we'll get into this, why this is going to be considered en banc, I am sure, by the Ninth Circuit. And it would not surprise me at all if it is reversed. And if it is going to be reversed, let me just say it needs to be reversed quickly because Donald Trump could do a lot of damage in the meantime.
And by the way, that's what there was a 3-judge panel, 2 Trump-appointed judges and 1 very moderate Clinton-appointed judge. And that judge herself said that this not only needs, she said like unto herself that this needs to be revisited by the full court here, and it needs to be done quickly for exactly the reason that you laid out. So can you talk a little bit about what would en banc review look like? What's kind of the process that we should expect now, and whether it needs to be done because it was asked for by one of the parties, or whether the judges are just going to do it sua sponte unto themselves?
Yeah. So the first thing I just want to make a brief note that, Clinton judges are not what people now think of as like Democratic judges. First of all, the way in which judges were appointed back at that time was much less controversial and partisan. But the second thing is Bill Clinton actually just appointed a lot of really moderate judges. Like these are not, she individually, this particular judge tends to be actually very moderate and very understated. And so the fact that she is sounding the alarm really should give everyone a lot of concern. So the way the Ninth Circuit works, which is different than any of the other judicial circuits because it's so large, is normally the way en banc works everywhere else is every judge in the circuit votes whether or not to take the case for reconsideration, right? En banc just means re-argument before the entire court. And everywhere else they do that, they vote among all of the active judges, and then if it's granted, all those judges hear the cases. But not in the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is so big that they actually take a panel of 11 judges and use that as the en banc court. So it's not actually every judge, it's just the 11 judges that get drawn somewhat at random. But it can still be a bit of a crapshoot about what that panel looks like, even though it's a much larger cross-section of judges. So this has already been, a suggestion of en banc has already been made. And so the parties are briefing that right now, and then the judges will vote. I'm pretty sure they're going to take this en banc. I think that when you just look at the total number of judges and the composition of who they are, I think you will see this taken en banc with some support by judges appointed by Republicans, and even if I go out on a limb, perhaps even a judge or two appointed by Donald Trump.
To what extent do you think, though, that even if they do get en banc, even if this is overturned by the full bench of judges and the Ninth Circuit agrees with Judge Immergut in Portland, to what extent do you think this is still just an academic exercise? Because if I'm not mistaken, the Supreme Court is already going to hear or has already been asked to hear the decision from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals for the Chicago case, the analogous Chicago case. And so really at the end of the day, once the Supreme Court rules on Donald Trump's completely baseless troop deployments, it doesn't really matter what the Ninth Circuit says or any other circuit says because they've made their decision.
Yeah, not exactly. I mean, the fact is that what the Supreme Court's being asked to do in the Seventh Circuit case, as you say, out of Chicago, is to issue an emergency stay, right? The government wants it blocked. And the court has a few options there. I mean, they could issue an emergency stay and simply not say anything about the reason why. They could deny the stay and not say anything about the reason why. They could take the case, they could issue a stay and then take the case, and then it will be argued, and then there'll be a lot. Or they could issue some type of, opinions or views, not really full opinions, but mini opinions as to what they're doing. And we don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do. So it is quite possible that the Supreme Court either issues a stay or doesn't issue a stay, but the justices don't explain themselves, at which point, frankly,
there's no
the Ninth Circuit should act as if that didn't have any, that has no precedential effect, notwithstanding the fact that some of the Supreme Court justices actually got pissy with trial courts for not finding precedential effect in the past from those things. And you may remember, I think you and I did an episode on that going back, and everyone really ought to take a chance right now, not only to look at those past episodes, but to subscribe to this channel to make sure that you are in the algorithm to help make sure you get fed more of this content, and really hit the bell to make sure you are notified when Brian and I post new videos and when Brian posts other videos as well.
And I should note, too, that, Mark, you and your team at Democracy Docket have been doing unbelievably good coverage of all of the goings-on in these courts as it relates to these troop deployments, whether it's in Chicago, L.A., or Portland, or any of the, the Ninth or the Seventh Circuit, and ultimately in the Supreme Court. So highly recommend for anybody who is in any way interested in any of this, the best coverage that you're going to get is through Democracy Docket. So I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Go ahead, click on that, make sure that you sign up so that you can actually get this coverage and learn all about this as it breaks. Mark, I have to ask, based on what we saw just on that 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit, what are these 2 Trump-appointed judges thinking? That they would validate his completely baseless claims of there being in any way a rebellion, a failure of the local government to effectuate its laws, to look at what's happening in Portland right now and see protests that consist of 12 people, 9 of whom are dressed up as frogs and unicorns, and to think that in any way that warrants a federal troop deployment in opposition to the governors, by the way, is so backwards and so dangerous of a precedent to set. And so what is the basis for those judges to have said that he has carte blanche to be able to do that?
Right. And so, again, I just want to clarify for everyone. It is not like Donald Trump is saying, because there are 9 people dressed as frogs and unicorns, I'm sending in the National Guard. That would be problematic. I think legally problematic, but it would at least be honest. Instead, what Donald Trump is looking at those 9 people and then claiming that what he is seeing is a city on fire, a city that is out of control. And so it is the fact that the court is giving him credit for factual assertions that are simply not true, that the trial courts have said are not true. It is one thing to give the president deference in how he weighs the relative threat posed by someone dressed up as a frog. It is another thing, though, to give him deference for facts that just never happened,
right.
For things that are not happening. And so what the judges are thinking, I don't know. I don't know. There's been speculation. Maybe one of them is auditioning for the Supreme Court. I literally have no idea. What I know is this, is that if this standard holds, if this ruling holds, what it means is that Donald Trump could say, I see fires burning in Miami. And he could be told that was fires from 2 years ago, from a bonfire after a college football game. And he can say, okay, well, based on that, I'm sending in the National Guard into Indianapolis. right? I mean, like there's no limiting principle,
Right.
time, place, truth, falsity. There's no limiting principle to what these two judges said. And that's why it's so important that everyone pay attention to this case, follow it, follow this channel, and hopefully follow Democracy Docket.
I think the hard part to reconcile here is when it comes to the presumption of regularity, that this idea of deference that's been given to the White House for decades and decades and decades, that we have seen so many instances where Donald Trump is not acting in good faith. And you and I have spoken at length about this idea that, okay, when are judges going to start to recognize, hey, this administration doesn't actually deserve the presumption of regularity because they lie so much? And it did seem like judges were more and more willing to kind of buck this trend of just blindly offering deference to Donald Trump because he lies with such ease. But here it seems to be the exact opposite, where you've got judges who are not only offering the Trump administration this presumption of regularity, but offering it to him on this pretext of what is so bad faith. I mean, like, it's so clear when he says that Portland is on fire that if you have eyes, if you're willing to just look and acknowledge objective reality, that's not what's happening. And so I guess the question here is, like, does it concern you that in a moment where we should be going the opposite direction, where we should be recognizing that this administration is not deserving of the good faith that they're normally given, is not deserving of the deference that they're normally given, that instead we now have judges who seem just as willing as Trump administration officials to kind of bury their heads in the sand in blind deference to what Trump is doing?
Yeah, and it's really interesting that there's a definite pattern here. And it's not a partisan pattern. As you point out, the judge in Portland was appointed by President Trump.
Yeah.
It is trial judges are the ones saying, this is crazy.
Yeah.
These are not the facts. And it is the appellate courts, and unfortunately, probably ultimately the Supreme Court, that is the one who is falling back on this idea, well, administrations are presumed to tell the truth. They're presumed to have good reasons. They're presumed to act in the public interest in good faith. So that's the disconnect. And why I think that is so, and why I think that is the case is because trial judges are in the business of living in their communities, having people come into their courtroom all the time in all kinds of criminal cases, petty crimes, serious crimes, in civil disputes between landlords and tenants, between two businesses. They are in the business of sort of sorting out the facts, right? For anyone who's ever watched, a TV show with, one of these, Judge Judy, Judge whatever, right? Like, you see it, like these judges, they're used to sorting out who did what to who and who's telling the truth. So they're very comfortable saying, okay, well, the president says there are fires burning in Portland. I am a judge in Portland, and I can have witnesses come into my courtroom. I can ask the fire chief to come into my courtroom and say, sir, are there any fires burning in Portland? How does it compare to fires in the past weeks, right? We can ask the mayor's office. So they're very comfortable with that. These appellate judges, and the worse you get, the higher up, is they kind of don't do that, right? They're like thinking in the abstract, well, we should assume that presidents act in good faith. And if a president says there's a fire, who are we to say there isn't, right? It's like this disconnect from reality. So I think that's why it's happening. It's incredibly dangerous for democracy. I mean, it is incredibly dangerous for a constitutional republic where you assume that presidents are in fact operating in good faith. And you have to pivot the judiciary out of that mindset when you have someone as dangerous and as compulsively a liar as Donald Trump. And right now, we're not seeing that pivot being done as aggressively or as fast or as strongly as it needs to. And, I've written about this, and you and I have done videos on it. I really think that in the end, if democracy does not survive, it may very well be this doctrine of presumption of regularity, which has no constitutional basis, has no textual basis in the law, that was just made up as a shorthand, a convenience for judges to sort of move cases along. It would really be a shame if that's the thing that winds up undermining and destroying democracy.
Well, look, I think as the judiciary drops the ball in deference to Trump, I think that underscores the need for people like you and your team to continue to fight on the front lines where you are, which is not just in the media, but actually in the courts, ground zero, where it matters most. And you have been battling these cases, whether it's the 60 some odd cases in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 election, all the way to you'll be arguing in front of the Supreme Court in just a couple of months now in December. So
December 9th, everyone mark their calendars.
Yeah, so look, I think one small step that everybody here watching right now could take is, again, if you are not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, a small step that we can all take to not only support Mark and his team, but also be able to get the great resource that is this independent, fearless journalism. So I'm going to put the link to Democracy Docket right here on this screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.